Hi, and welcome to Divorce Hacker. I'm your host, Ann Grant. On this show, we'll have a variety of guests who've been through divorce and are experts on the topic. Whether you're thinking about a divorce, in the midst of it, or already divorced, we are here to share our stories with you in the hope that you may relate, learn, process, and overcome whatever you're experiencing in your life. Jackie is a high-conflict divorce coach and the host of the podcast Out of Crazy Town, your guide to divorcing a narcissist. She is also one of my all-time favorite people. Jackie survived a very high-conflict divorce and is just a superstar. She coaches other people now in how to survive and thrive from their high-conflict divorces. She's the mother of 2 wonderful teenage daughters, and I am so excited to welcome her on our show today. Jackie,
hi.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. This is fantastic. I'm excited to be here.
So, what led you to become a divorce coach?
Well, when my 3rd grade teacher, Mrs. LeBlanc, asked me what I wanted to be when I grow up, I'm pretty sure I didn't say divorce coach, but basically I was forged by fire. I like to say I found this career path after, like you said, being or going through a high conflict divorce. And I just thought to myself, how are women doing this? How are they getting through this? And I thought, I have to help. And so I just started researching how I could help women, and it led me to be a divorce coach now.
So what is a high conflict divorce coach?
I'm so glad you asked that, because the funny thing is I actually take issue with the term high conflict divorce. And the reason is I think that it implies that both sides are just problem people who just can't get along. And I think that's very often what a lot of court professionals think, like judges, for instance. When in reality, if you take a deeper look at a lot of high conflict divorces, there's usually just one party who is really the problem child. And often they have a cluster B personality disorder, like narcissistic personality disorder. There are others among those. But out in the world, people understand the term high conflict. And so that's basically, because it was the kind of divorce that I was in, why I specialize in this, because so many people do not understand the true dynamics of high conflict divorce. And so there is a lot that goes into it. There's something that is called post-separation abuse that happens in pretty much every single high conflict divorce. And basically, because there's one disordered individual involved, they will then start to feel that they're losing control after the spouse that they were controlling is leaving the relationship or the marriage. And the loss of that control just absolutely sends them spinning, and they look for other ways to control. So post-separation, they start picking up other tools, and there are lots of different kinds of abuses that kick in at that point. And that's the definition of a high conflict divorce, as far as I'm concerned.
What are some of these, as you said, control mechanisms that they exert, and how do they show up in your experience?
Sure. So one of the biggest ones is legal abuse. So now that they're in the court system, one of their biggest weapons is to use the court system. And I've seen them very often just drag out their divorces for months and years past when they should have, come to a conclusion. They will just keep taking their spouse back to court for really frivolous things. They will kick in another level of financial abuse. They will cut them off financially, even though they're not supposed to do that, right? According to, the legal sort of way the process works during divorce. Just pull all kinds of shenanigans, unfortunately, using the children against them, because now, again, that they've lost control, they start to use the children as a weapon. And so there's counter-parenting, there's the legal abuse, there's the financial abuse, smear campaigns, making sure they go around in the community and just saying horrible things about you, so you're left feeling alone and just really on your own. And it's a very scary time. So those are just a few.
Now, I know that you have 2 teenage daughters.
Yes.
And you yourself went through a very challenging divorce. Did you experience any of the things that you just mentioned, including the weaponization of your children while you were going through your own divorce?
Well, I see every divorce has its own personality, even though I like to say folks like this all follow a similar script, but then of course there are idiosyncrasies that they have, and every divorce will be slightly different. Mine had a major financial component, so there was, immediate cutting off of finances. There was, yes, a lot of unnecessary litigation. There were, as you know, what's called ex parte, where they bring you in on these emergencies that are not emergency, court hearings in front of the judge, and just keeping the chaos going so that you're constantly stressed out and financially strapped. And especially as being the out spouse or the spouse that's not the primary earner, it's terrifying. And again, even though according to sort of California law, for instance, and many other states, everything is supposed to stay status quo, and the finances are supposed to stay pretty much the same. Everything gets paid for until the divorce comes to a conclusion. These people get away with it for a long time before the court system finally catches up to what's going on, even with the best attorneys, right? And so it can be a very scary time. But yes, mine had definitely a major financial component, major legal component. My daughters were caught in the middle. This might sound like a bizarre thing to say. I feel like I got lucky. They weren't as weaponized as I see a lot of the cases that do happen. It did start to happen early on, and I really saw the children being put in the middle or asked, what did mom feed you for dinner last night? Well, come on. Like you didn't ask that for the first, 14 years of our marriage, and now you want to know so you can write it down and, tell the judge that I'm not feeding the children properly after I've been the primary caregiver. But those are the kinds of crazy things that happen. And, you have your little 9-year-old being interrogated every time they're back with their father, to try to get information to use against you. So, yes.
What do you advise the women that you work with respect to how to cope with a narcissistic spouse during a divorce? Are there some tools that you advise and that they utilize?
Absolutely. Well, I know when I got started, and again, the reason I became a divorce coach in high conflict was because there wasn't a lot of support out there. And I did end up stumbling on someone who had also been through a really difficult journey in divorce. And she had kind of put up a site and was helping people, but there was only one of her. And thank God I found her, because I did have a little bit of support, because your attorney needs to focus just on the legal aspect of the divorce, right? And they're just looking at it from a legal standpoint and how to get you from A to B. And your therapist is great because they need to be there to help you understand how you got there and work through the emotions of it, and maybe hope that you don't make those mistakes again in the future, but work through the trauma. And then there's this giant gap where you just need to call someone and say, am I crazy? Or, is this not normal? And then also to have somebody who's sort of educated on the process and help walk you through it and say, should I respond to this email? Because you don't necessarily want to call your attorney every single time they send a crazy email. And yet you're terrified that you're going to look bad in court if you don't. And so, while I'm definitely not an attorney, and I always throw out that disclaimer, and I always advise all my clients to check with their attorney on everything, you might get a 3-page email that goes on and on about how horrible you were to their parents and their siblings, and you never included his family, all these years, and that you have been bad-mouthing him in the community, and how this isn't good for the children, and how you don't have their best interest. And you get this email and you go into full panic mode, because you're like, oh my gosh, people are going to believe him. Look at all these bad things he's saying about me. What should I do? Should I respond? And I usually have one of a couple answers. One is, okay, well, did he ask anything specific about the children? whether he needs to pick them up at school, a doctor appointment, something they're eating, a medication. Well, no, don't respond. It was just an effort to completely keep you stressed out, and it's working. If you really feel like you have to respond, maybe respond. None of that is true. They love to get you going and keep you caught up in the chaos. And so that is where I just wish I would have had more support. And I feel like, I really offer support to other people. It's just having someone there to say that's, been through it before, because you can't explain it to people.
So what I'm hearing you say, and in my experience with this, because in my practice I represent a lot of women who are divorcing narcissists. My advice to them is very similar to yours, which is minimize your interaction, set boundaries. Sometimes it's better to say nothing at all. It's a little bit of a cat and a mouse game, I think, when you're dealing with a narcissist.
It is.
In that there's gaslighting, which we'll talk about some more in a minute. I see that a lot. And I see how effective it is, because the women that I'm representing, and I know that you work with, they've been in this relationship for so long. I think part of the challenge in our work is they can't always see things clearly. And that's why I often will suggest that they work with you, is so that you can sort of shed a light, look at things from 30,000 feet, and provide some objectivity to them. Is that something that you experience in your work with women that are going through this, that maybe they can't really truly see what's going on very clearly because they're so acclimated to the abuse?
Yeah, that is a perfect term for it, acclimated to the abuse. And I'm glad you said that. And I will give you a perfect example. I was in the parking lot here finishing up a call before I came in. A woman, she is going to believe it or not, get through her divorce through mediation. It's a long story. Like I said, every divorce has its different personality. She was able to get that done. However, she called me because she is terrified that he's going to find out that this final version of their settlement, that she consulted an attorney for 5 minutes before she signed off on it. Now, excuse me? Why would she be not only did the mediator say, please go, each of you go away, consult attorneys on your, on this, just to make sure there's nothing we're missing, but she's so afraid for him to find out she consulted an attorney, because that was part of the control. She was never allowed to go get any help or bring it, or include anyone from the outside on what was really going on in the marriage. And here she's doing this very rational thing that's being recommended by the mediator, and she is absolutely terrified and was saying, do I tell the mediator I consulted an attorney? I said, well, she told you to, and I laugh, but it's not funny. And I completely understand what she's going through, because for years she was conditioned to the gaslighting, you're always in trouble for something. That's how they keep you under their thumb. It could be the most minor thing, but if you look back on your marriage, you were always in trouble for something. And she's terrified she's going to be in trouble for this. And it's the most rational thing in the world. And so, yeah, it's something I deal with a lot. And there are just a million different examples I have of that.
Now that you're sharing this story, and I'm reflecting on sort of the common thread in these situations, what I find is exactly what you just said. They're very afraid, and they're paralyzed by their fear. And it's very frustrating for me as their lawyer oftentimes, because they seem to be unable to accept thorough, reasoned, thoughtful advice. A lot of times they'll sit there and nod and say yes, 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 but when it comes time to do whatever the thing is that needs to be done, they are immobilized and frozen and unable to do that, because their spouse has got them into this position where they feel like it's a very codependent relationship often. And they feel like if they don't do what he's telling them to do, something very terrible will happen to them, even when the facts belie it.
Yeah.
I am working with a gal right now whose husband had convinced her to do nothing while he carried on an affair openly, paid the rent on another home that was in the same neighborhood in a very expensive part of LA, and then was trying to convince her to list their home for sale so that he could continue to support his affair partner. And of course, when I pointed out to her that this was insanity, she then proceeded to sort of argue with me and almost take his side. And fortunately, I've been doing this long enough now, and I've been dealing with enough people in this situation that I recognize something that I've been told by a mental health professional, and I really believe this is true, that when you're in a relationship with someone who suffers from a mental illness like narcissism, for example, you can become and will become as sick or sicker than they are. And I'm seeing this again and again. I have another client who really wants to be divorced. Husband's carrying on openly in another relationship. They had a lot of money, but he is spending the money as fast as it can be made. And all of the facts are very clear that action must be taken. And rather than follow the advice she's given, her response is, well, I don't want to poke the bear.
Yeah.
You know, there's this surfing trip coming up, and I really want my son to be able to go on that with my husband. And, you know, you almost want to shake these people and say, there won't be any more surfing trips if we don't stop the bleeding, like, immediately.
Right.
So, do you have any advice for women that are in this situation where they are so, it's almost like an abused woman, a battered woman?
It is.
Who
for sure.
stays with their abuser?
For sure.
What can we do to help these gals who know that they're in that situation and yet seem almost unable to escape from their abuser?
Sure. It's you're validating me more and more in terms of being a divorce coach, because not only do I see that so many times, I often will get a client and they are defending their ex in the beginning of our time together. And then over time I watch them. You know, I don't know that I have a really good answer for that, Anne. And this is why I think it's so important to have somebody that really understands you. If it's not necessary, it could be a therapist who also understands the need for you to move forward in addition to treating your therapy. But with high conflict divorce coaches, and not to keep plugging my job, but we get the time to spend together so that they get to commiserate a little bit, they get the understanding, and then where the coaching comes in is you're asking the questions and letting them answer them themselves, and they come to the conclusion on their own. But you cannot rush it. You can't rush how quickly they get there, you know. And I have clients that are, you know, get there in a week, and clients that I've had for a year and are still struggling with it. And so, but you know, we just keep plugging away. They do make progress, but it depends on so many things. Maybe how deep the abuse and the trauma was. You know, it depends on so many things. But it's something they really need another partner there with them to keep walking them through it and reminding them that they're not crazy and they are doing the right thing, and you know that you understand the abuse and what they're going through. But then ask them, what's the alternative if you don't do these things your attorney advises? What are the consequences for not doing that? And letting them come to those conclusions on their own.
That's very helpful. Now, what do you recommend for the people that are watching this who are trying to figure out whether they're currently married to a narcissist and how to navigate, or, you know, allowing themselves to be free of that? What communication tools can they use in order to set boundaries and And still, I mean, the court requires that there's a certain amount of communication, particularly when there's children. You can't just ignore your spouse.
Right.
So are there any particular tools that can be used in setting boundaries and yet still, you know, meeting the obligations that you have as a co-parent to communicate?
Yeah, it's really tough. And again, it kind of depends on the situation. However, yes, basically, we kind of talked about this earlier, but there's the BIF model, which a lot of people use when it comes to communicating with your soon-to-be ex-spouse. Brief, informative, friendly, and fair. I'm blanking.
Brief, informative, friendly, and fair. I like that.
Yeah, I basically use different versions of it, but the bottom line is the thing that people don't understand oftentimes when they come to me, if they haven't understood it yet from their attorney, is that yes, you have to portray an image to the court if you're going to be going through the system, and it's going to get litigious, and especially if there's going to be a custody battle. And you need to be hyper aware of how you are presenting to court professionals. And that often means that you have to do a lot of things that aren't fair. And you're going to have to take a lot of flack from the other side because they're hell-bent on trying to make you crazy during this process. And so that is something I talk a lot with clients, because you always have to look like you're being cooperative and communicative, but you can't leave the door open too wide for the abuse to continue. And so I do take it case by case, but again, one of the questions that people can ask themselves is, you know, when they're receiving a specific communication, are they really asking anything about the children? Is there anything really about the kids? Always ask yourself, is there really something specific in here that they're asking about the kids? Sometimes they like to really give themselves credit where they never paid attention to the children before at all. They barely know their middle name. And all of a sudden, if you read their declaration, they were the primary caretaker and they did everything right when in the marriage when it came to taking care of the kids. And I always say, you have nothing to lose. Respond, good job, thanks, great, awesome. Because you know what? It just makes you look good. And I know sometimes I get this response, but he didn't do that, but he wasn't the primary caretaker. It's okay. I would say pretend a judge is reading everything you write.
Yes.
And my other piece of advice is you want to focus on how that judge or other professional feels about you when they leave. So when they're at dinner tonight with their spouse and they're recounting their day and their case, they might not be telling their spouse about the specifics in some communication they read, but they will tell their spouse how they felt about the parties in the case. She's high maintenance, he's difficult, she's trying real hard, he's not. Think about, if you read your communications with your spouse, how would someone feel about you?
I love that.
When they set it down. And that's what you want to go for.
I love that. What I always tell my clients and what I strive for is we always want to be wearing the white hat. And to your point, everything that's in writing, you should assume that it will be read out loud in a courtroom.
Yeah.
And so everything that is written should be reread. And you should pause.
Yes.
The power of the pause.
Oh.
Maybe sleep on it.
Huge.
Take out the emotion. You know, we're living in an age where we hear a lot about conscious uncoupling and co-parenting, which of course is not just the Hollywood ideal, but it's, you know, the ideal. However, I think those of us who work in this arena where we're dealing with these divorces from narcissistic spouses understand that, you know, we're not dealing with evolved individuals that are conscious. And so it is a different set of parameters or rules that apply. What are your thoughts about co-parenting versus parallel parenting when you're divorcing a narcissist?
Well, you know, the thing that we all need to ask ourselves is, how is this affecting the children, right? They should be the very first priority in everything you do. And sometimes, and then I'll talk about parallel parenting a little bit more in a second, but sometimes less communication between you and your ex is better for the children. In a perfect world, that conscious uncoupling sounds amazing. It sounds fantastic. I would love to do that. That's not the world I live in. It wasn't my experience, and it's none of my clients' experience. So it's awesome. Yes, everyone should strive for that. However, if the conflict continues, and if every time you open the window this much and you get a punch in the face, right, from the other side, you have to decide, okay, I think parallel parenting is going to be the better choice here for my children, because they're going to feel less tension. They're going to feel less conflict. So if your answer is that it's truly better for the children, then I think parallel parenting is the answer. And what that means is you parent in your house, they parent in their house, and you do everything you can to just keep the vibe, the energy with your child positive when you're with them. You can't control what the other side does. Especially if they're counter-parenting. So I had a case, for instance, where the child was really allergic to dogs, and the ex got 2 dogs. It's hard to understand, but he did it just to get at her, because he knew the wife, the mom, would be so upset knowing her son was going over there during his parenting time. And the baby was going to have an allergic reaction. And however, her attorney talked to her and said, I don't think we're going to be able to go to court and get rid of the dogs. They actually did eventually. We can talk about we can go into that if you guys want. But it's basically the bottom line is you have to say, I can't control a lot of what goes on over there. The court doesn't care if they eat pizza every single night. They don't. They're being fed. And so even though that's really, might be really bad for them, feed them as many vegetables as you can while they're at your house, because they cannot wait for that email from you that begs them to stop feeding Johnny pizza. They're living for it. They're waiting for it. So trying to control eating pizza at dad's house is never going to work. So you have to decide to be the best parent you can be while they're in your household. Keep communication to a minimum, because they're just waiting for it. They're living for it. And whatever goes on at dad's house, unless the children are, being harmed, and it's something that your attorney says the court's going to care about, you parallel parent.
So you just raised one of the really important characteristics of dealing with a narcissist in a divorce that I think is really hard for so many people to deal with, which is the narcissist has zero regard for the collateral damage, particularly with regard to how it impacts the children. The narcissist is incapable of experiencing empathy. And so for them, it's a zero-sum game. It's all about winning at your expense. And so the more reasonable you are, it doesn't work. You're not dealing with someone who would respond to that. You're not dealing with someone that would be sympathetic or empathetic to the fact that if they get a dog, it's going to cause your child to have an adverse medical reaction. And in my experience, there is like a learning curve, I think, for women going through this process to fully embrace that their spouse, not only, I think most people getting a divorce eventually realize that they are no longer their spouse's priority. Mm-hmm. But the piece I think that takes them longer to catch up to is that the children are not the priority. And yet, if they're honest with themselves and really reflect back on the course of their marriage and their child's life, it's likely that neither they nor the child ever was. Because that is the signpost of being narcissistic.
Yeah.
It's all about them, it's all about their ego. And so what happens is when you decide to end the marriage, all bets are off. Mm-hmm. And to your point, things that seem incomprehensible start happening. Like they will get a dog just to get back at you with zero regard for the child. Now, if I were in that case, and it sounds like what ultimately happened, the recourse is to keep copious notes about what's going on from an unemotional perspective.
Right.
Provide them to your attorney. Don't just suffer in silence. Work with your divorce coach and give the attorney the tools that he or she needs to be able to go to court, because a judge is primarily interested in the children's health, safety, and welfare. And so if I were representing that client and that happened, I would use that to go into court to get a change in custody because the children's health and well-being is being endangered.
Yep.
But I think that when you're in the weeds, I went through my divorce before I was a family law attorney. I was so emotionally wrought by some of the things you're describing that I was really incapable, even though I was a lawyer, of disaggregating my emotion and my anger, my deep, deep anger over not putting the children first, because you would think all reasonable parents would do that.
Right.
And catching up and educating myself with the reality of the fact is that they don't come first for that person. But the other thing that's hopeful, I think, is that once people recognize this and have proper coaching and good representation, you can engage in things like parallel parenting. You can recognize that, okay, this isn't going to happen over there, and that's okay.
Right.
Because it's going to happen over here. The love will be here.
Right.
The support will be here.
Right.
Our house will be peaceful.
Yep.
We are healthy. We are whole. And I think something that it's really important to remind those who are going through this of is the importance to take care of themselves. People going through this process can't take care of their children unless they get the help that they themselves need. And it's going to probably be a fair amount of help from a therapist, a divorce coach. They need to listen, find a really good lawyer who understands this, because not all lawyers do.
No.
And then get the support and help they need to heal. Because there's a lot of trauma associated with being in a narcissistic relationship. I represented a gal who, it was a domestic violence case. Husband was actually throwing things at her. And it's very serious. Children were endangered, police were called. When these things happen, we drop everything that we're doing and immediately, of course, focus on protecting our client and the children, because we don't want them to become a headline.
Right.
Okay, and so we did that. We got the restraining order, got her what she needed, and remarkably, I would say about 3 weeks after that happened, she went back with him. Put herself right back in that situation. He talked her into it, and she once again is in a situation where she's being abused. And so the problem is real. I mean, it is, I think, most akin to being a battered woman.
Yeah.
Psychological abuse is real.
Oh, yes.
And, it's one thing if you decide to stay with someone who's mentally abusive. That's your choice. But the collateral damage to your children is just really, we really owe it to them to not allow them to continue to have to suffer through that, because they will be deeply, deeply impacted in a plethora of ways that are going to show up for them.
Yes. And you said something earlier that was about like what people could do, and it made me think of even what you could do before the divorce, or if you're even thinking about it, or if you're even wondering if this is the course your divorce is going to take. And one thing that comes to mind is I always say, you know, because if you're afraid, if you're really afraid, there are signs that have been happening all through the marriage. You're afraid the post-separation abuse, you didn't know that's what it was called, you didn't know there was a name for it, but it's going to kick into gear when you let him or her know the marriage is over. Then it's probably going to take that course. And my advice is to sit with attorneys start researching now. It's terrifying because it's like an act of defiance in your marriage, and you've been taught that you will be punished for that. So I know it's terrifying, and you're afraid they're going to find out. But the best thing you can do is talk to attorneys, talk to a divorce coach, get a plan for what you would do if you're going to leave. Just find out and take that step, because I think you're right. I think the longer it goes on, your children are collateral damage. What they're being taught, watching the marriage, you think you might be doing a great job at keeping the peace. I'm not saying it's not going to get worse before it gets better. It probably is. But I think having your kids see you stand up for yourself and then being able to build a life for yourself afterwards is so valuable to show them.
What did you feel like when you finally finalized your divorce?
Oh my gosh. I have a couple comments about that. Amazing. I couldn't believe I did it. I kept saying, if Jackie 5 years ago could see Jackie today, I mean, it brings tears to my eyes right now to say it, because it's such an uphill battle and it's hard to do, but it was so worth it, Anne. It was so worth it. It was so worth it.
What is the power statement?
A power statement. That's something I have my clients do. A power statement is something to help you through basically your case, to your court. To me, it's kind of a legal thing, because it is the way you want to portray yourself to everyone who touches your case, and even your own attorney, because your attorney needs someone they can work with. Yeah. And like you said, unfortunately, our cases, it's just they've been through so much, and they're in fight or flight to the nth degree, and it's very hard for them to think rationally, me included. So what the power statement is it's a way for you to let court professionals know that you are sane and rational, and it gives you a way to also slip in some of the things that have been going on with your ex, because it's very easy for them to make you out as vindictive, crazy, whatnot, and right? I mean, they love that narrative. They love that narrative. So a power statement might look like this. It might say, when Dave and I got married, things were amazing. He's very charming. He's very outgoing. He's very ambitious. He was a great, breadwinner, provider for our family. And I thought we're gonna have this beautiful life together. And I'm so thankful that I have my 2 children for him, or with him. However, some things occurred that I never thought would happen. And I'm very saddened to say he became so controlling and so verbally abusive. And the children and I became afraid of him. He would do things like, name 1 or 2 examples. And so I'm really saddened that we're here today in this position. However, my goal is to get through this, put the children first, for the 2 of us to be able to go on with our lives and figure out how to co-parent. And the reason that's so important is, it lets whoever's listening to you, a judge, a custody evaluator, a GAL, anyone who comes in on your case. And sometimes, like I said, even your own attorney, who needs to know that you're thinking rationally sometimes when you've been able to hold it together. First of all, it points out the things that they're seeing in your spouse. So they're like, okay, yeah, that's what I see. The charming. I see that he's a hard worker. I see that he earned a great living, and you should probably be grateful you lived such a great life, right? While he was earning all this money. But that's interesting. I didn't know about the verbal abuse. I didn't know about this. They're a little more willing to let their guard down and listen to you. And then when you end it on a positive note, they walk away with that feeling I was talking about earlier. Okay, she's hopeful. She wants to try for this to come out in a positive way. And then you've got this person now that's willing to listen to you. So it's really important to have your power statement and format it in that regard, and you can tweak it along the way, but it needs to be your mantra.
I really like that, because I'm a big believer in what we say we do, and what we do we become. And I believe this is how we manifest our new, stronger self. And I think a statement like that for these gals in the situation who feel so trapped has to be invaluable, just in terms of shifting their energy. Because, I mean, to move through this process and divorce a narcissist takes a lot of backbone.
Yeah.
I mean, you really have to buckle your seatbelt.
Yes. Well said.
So, Jackie, what did you learn from your divorce? These are questions that I'm asking everyone who's on the show. What did you learn?
Okay, what I learned was, when you're going through a difficult time, no matter what, the most important thing is, and this is a giant aha moment for me, to as much as possible, focus on your positive future and what you want that to be. I know that doesn't address all the crap that's going on in your divorce, but it's meant to not address the crap that's going on in your divorce. You have to find any minute of every day to focus on a positive future.
I love that. The next question is, what would you do differently with regard to your children if you went through your divorce again?
That's, let's see, that's also an interesting question. You know, I think that I was so worried about them and what they were going through. There were a couple of times I didn't sit down and have conversations with them because I thought, oh, they're going through enough, or, you know, I don't want to put them on the spot right now, and there were things going on in their lives as teenagers, right, that I would have normally had a conversation with. Why are you doing that? What's going on with this? And I kind of backed off because I was just on eggshells, just worried about them. So I think there were a couple of things that occurred just on their path as teenagers that I would have sat down with them and had those conversations regardless, because I just still needed to be a parent. And even if that meant making it more uncomfortable for a little while.
And what would you advise women who are divorcing a narcissist, the number one thing that they can do?
If you are not in the divorce yet, it's what I said earlier, research, talk to people, figure out how you can plan, figure out what documentation you need, talk to an attorney, make a plan. If you're already in it, it is the way you're being perceived, which also involves you getting help from your attorney, from a divorce coach, from your therapist. You need a plan. You need a plan, and you need to talk to people that know how to make plans. So you got to get help.
Thank you so much for being on our show today. It's been so fun to talk to you. I really appreciate you being here.
You too. I'm so excited to be here, Anne. This has been so great. Thank you.